really good segue. Let's talk about clinical trial, right? And this is what you do, and you've done a lot of important work. Um, who is eligible for clinical trial? And who should be even thinking about it? And maybe walk us through, is it just someone who have failed the standard treatment? Let's say they're stage 4 disease and they tried the combination immunotherapy, it's not working. Those type of patient only, or there are other groups?
Yeah, and so there are important clinical trials going on for every single stage of disease. And so we have clinical trials for people who have melanoma with lymph nodes still in place. And we've got a number of clinical trials to give medicines before surgery, see if that impacts outcomes and what that does to the tumor. And so those are those neoadjuvant clinical trials. So even before surgery, there's some things that you might want to consider. After surgery, we have adjuvant clinical trials where we're trying to improve upon the efficacy that we're seeing with single agent PD-1 or targeted therapy. And then in the metastatic setting, we have many clinical trials, even for patients who have not received kind of the standard of care therapy.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And there we're combining, right? We're combining the standard of care immunotherapy and adding something else, or doing the treatment a different way that will maybe decrease the risk of side effects, or combining targeted and immunotherapy. So it's not just when you've exhausted all treatment options. At every single point in disease, and this is true for all cancer, but certainly for melanoma, at every point in disease, if you were inclined and had access to some clinical trials, there's going to be something really promising for you.
What is this? Who's paying for this? Basically, is it the drug company or the patient is paying for it? And maybe you can also talk to us about the logistics. Is it I know, but sometimes you have placebo. It's like the two controlled arms, and how do you even know? I'm getting the drug. Let's say.
Yeah, so these are all really good questions. So first of all, the placebo question comes up a lot. There are a lot of fears I think that people might have about going on a clinical trial. And certainly people will say, look, I don't want to be a lab rat. And I tell people, you are not a lab rat. We are not doing this. We are not doing this just to kind of test without some hope or expectation of potential for clinical benefit. We're doing this to help you. In every single cancer trial, patients are getting, at the very least, the standard of care.
That I think is a very, very important, because there's a lot of misconceptions circling around, right, about clinical trial. But keep going.
Yeah. So sometimes we'll give, the standard of care treatment plus a new drug, and some patients will get that, and other patients will get standard of care plus a placebo, right?
Yeah.
A placebo, but they're still getting real treatment.
Yeah.
So we would never deprive somebody of kind of standard of care therapy.
No, that's very important. And here's something else that for someone who's going through the clinical trial, what are some of the barriers, like logistic barriers? Does it require more time, more visit, more blood drawn, more imaging? Or like what are some of the barriers?
Yeah, so the clinical trials, the benefit for people is that they're getting access to something novel, hopefully more effective than what we're otherwise able to give. That's why we're doing this. Certainly advances the science and certainly will help patients in the future, right? So that will happen. Now, what's the cost? The cost is the logistics. The trials are can be more taxing in terms of travel, time spent in the clinic. A lot of times, especially for kind of the earlier phase clinical trials, where we're studying really new things, there could be like 10-hour days where you're sitting there getting blood drawn, and sometimes you're getting biopsies of the tumor at different time points. And so there are definitely more tests, longer days, maybe more visits, and these typically have to be done at one of the study centers, so it might not be able to be done at kind of the doctor's office around the corner. All of that has to change. All of that has to change. It's too hard. We can't keep on doing trials like this.
Yeah, well, I think we have to bring the trial to the patient, right? Versus for them to come to your center, because you can imagine they're already tired, they're already exhausted. And but so before we stop right here about the clinical trial, how does anyone find the clinical trial? I mean, besides Googling you, right? Let's say, but are there any other places, like is there a website or
It's very hard. Okay, so the one source that we'll cite a lot is a website called clinicaltrials.gov,
yeah,
which is really a clearinghouse of all of the clinical trials. It's a little bit hard to use, so I don't think it's the most user-friendly site, but it is pretty comprehensive. There are fantastic patient advocacy groups like the Melanoma Research Foundation, the Melanoma Research Alliance, AIM at Melanoma. All of these groups have, patient navigators and people who like help you access kind of clinical trials and specialists. In addition, I wouldn't forget, I would definitely have a conversation with your oncologist. Right now, I would not expect every single oncologist to know about all of the melanoma trials. It's just impossible. But they might say, look, maybe it's worth a visit to a melanoma specialist. Maybe we can do virtual visits, something just as a one-time visit. So at least you speak to someone who kind of knows the landscape.
yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree. Totally agree.